Hello, everyone. Today we are going to discuss about the idea of dummy variables. This is one of the last topics that we are going to discuss as part of our discussions related to econometrics in this semester. See, all this while we were considering various econometric models, there was one commonality that we could observe. And this commonality was that almost all the variables that we have considered till now were quantitative variables, right? All variables that we have considered till now were quantitative variables. For example, in many models that we have considered, we have come across this variable called income, right? Or in various other models, we have come across variables like consumption, right? Likewise, for example, in the previous models, multiple regression models that we have considered the sales data pertaining to different stores in a particular locality, right? Of which the in which the dependent variables were the independent variables were population, right, income of the people in the locality, etc. See, as I have just mentioned, the common connect between all of these variables that we have considered is that they are all quantitative variables. They were all quantitative variables. What do we mean by these quantitative variables? They are measurable in numerical terms, right? They are exactly measurable, right? Income you can assign a definite number to it. But we know that in actual practice, when we deal with data and when we deal with economic phenomena also, not all of the data that we might deal with uh, can be captured in terms of numbers, right? It is kind of impossible to kind of include or to capture all variables in exact numerical terms. Such variables which cannot be captured in exact numerical terms, which are there are variables which are inherently qualitative in nature, right? They are inherently qualitative, right? An example that we can possibly say is that of gender, right? Gender in a very restricted sense. We can say that there exists can have only two possibilities, right? One is male, the other is female. In a very restricted sense, without exploring the great possibilities that this term would offer, right? We can just say that it has only two possibilities of being male or female. See, this is an inherently qualitative variable, and gender is something that would figure in our assessment, right? Related to a large number of aspects. For example, wage determination when you consider. Gender can be an important variable that you consider. But you look at the nature of this variable as such, you can see that it cannot be quantified like what we have done in the case of other variables that we have considered till now. It's not a variable like income or consumption, right? Or the sales data that we have talked about. The nature of the variable itself is very, very different, right? This is what we call as a qualitative variable, right? Qualitative variable, which is inherently qualitative. And this cannot be expressed as a number as such, right? So there arises a question, when you stumble upon such kinds of variables, is it possible for us to include such variables in econometric models? For example, in a regression analysis that we have learned, right? Is it possible for us to incorporate these type of variables, which are inherently qualitative in nature? Luckily, there exists ways in which these kinds of inherently qualitative variables can be quantified, right? And a method or a way in which we try to quantify such kinds of variables, we call them as dummy variables, right? You call them as dummy variables. Or another name that you assign would be binary variables. Why binary? Because, see, in this example that I have given, there are just two possibilities that you have before you, isn't it? You can either be male or female, right? So there are two possibilities. That's why you call them as binary variables, right? So it is using this dummy variables or what we call as binary variables that we try to incorporate such inherently qualitative information, right, into regression models or econometric models in general, right? So in a sense, if we are to talk about dummy variables, we can say that how do we quantify using dummy variables? We quantify using dummy variables by assigning one of the two values, right? Usually the values taken are either 0 or 1. We assign any of these values with this, right? For example, we can say that a dummy variable x, right, would be equal to 1, right, if a particular individual is female, right? A dummy variable would take value equal to 1 if the individual is female, and it would take a value equal to 0 if the individual is male. Okay. So what is that you can see? You have assigned, see, for example, if we are talking about gender, right? X is that variable, right? So here we are not saying that gender is going to take a value 1 or 0. We are saying that if it is equal to 1, it is female, right? While we are incorporating it in the model, we may not take it as gender, even though it would indicate gender. You may not take it as gender itself. We assign a value 1 to a female and 0 to a male, right? I think I'll be able to explain this better when we consider a model into consideration, right? For the time being, I hope we are able to make this distinction as to uh, what is the relevance of dummy variables and what does one dummy variables attempt to capture, right? Dummy variables are a method or a technique through which we try to capture variables which are inherently qualitative in nature. An example which I gave, there can be many examples like this, but usually used example is that of uh, signifying whether an individual is a male or female. There are only two such possibilities that we are considering, right? So to quantify this, we may use dummy variables by assigning a value 1 or 0, right? It is not always necessary that one has to be female itself, right? We can assign it the reverse in the reverse order also. You can say that x equal to 1 would signify male and x equal to 0 would signify female, right? So this is the way in which dummy variables are made use of. So dummy variables takes on only the values of 1 or 0, depending on whether some condition is met or not. In this case, the condition that we considered is whether the person is male or female, right? That is the reason why we have defined it this way. It can be some other condition. For example, you take the case of employees in a firm, right? A firm has a number of employees working with them, and uh, let's say that certain some of them have subscribed to the pension program launched by this firm. Some others have not subscribed to the pension program launched by this firm, right? See here, whether or not the person has subscribed to the pension program is a qualitative variable, isn't it? It is a qualitative variable. Suppose if we want to make use of it in a regression model, we incorporate it by using a dummy. We may call it simply as dummy itself, or we may call it as a dummy variable also. Dummy or dummy variable means one and the same. Okay. So here in this case, our item of interest is whether the person is subscribed to the pension scheme or not. So we can assign a value x equal to 1 if the person has subscribed to the pension scheme, right? And a value x equal to 0 if he or she has not subscribed to the pension scheme. Okay. So whatever be the variable of interest, whatever be the condition that we are placing, right? We try to incorporate that qualitative information into a quantitative form by assigning just two values, which is 0 and 1, right? And that is also the reason why these are also called as binary variables. Okay. I hope this distinction is very clear to all of you. I'll stop this video here. We'll continue in the next one.